It's 11 p.m. Netflix is playing in the background, like some show I've watched 4 times already, so I don't even have to pay attention to the plot.
Oh, yeah, the comfort watch.
Exactly. And the blue light of my phone is just illuminating my face in the dark, and I am entirely paralyzed. I am just endlessly scrolling Zillow.
The midnight Zillow spiral.
It is a disease. I'm looking at houses I haven't been pre-approved for, right? In neighborhoods I'm not even sure I want to live in. And the prices are literally making me want to cry.
I mean, it's so common.
I'm zooming in on the pictures, critiquing the terrible gray laminate flooring some flipper installed. And then I scroll down to the estimated monthly mortgage payment, and my heart just falls into my stomach.
Yeah, that absolute existential dread, I completely validate that feeling. Honestly, it's incredibly paralyzing because you are staring down this massive life-altering question. But before we dive into the math of why you, and probably everyone listening right now is doing this, we have to do our little disclaimer.
Right. The mandatory conversational disclaimer.
Yeah, so just a reminder that we aren't your financial advisors. Everything we talk about in this deep dive is for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not licensed investment professionals or mortgage brokers,
Exactly. Real estate markets change, mortgage rates fluctuate, and all financial decisions involve real risk. Like, you could actually lose money.
Definitely. You should always do your own research and consult with a qualified professional before making any major moves.
Okay, with the legal stuff out of the way, we really need to talk about the reality of trying to buy a house in 2026. Because for anyone in that, 28 to 35 demographic right now, the dilemma is just crushing.
It really is.
Say you're earning around $65,000 a year. You've been responsible. You got some modest savings, maybe 8 or 10 grand sitting in a high-yield account. You are doing everything you were told to do.
And yet the math still feels impossible. You're faced with this brutal choice, right?
Yeah.
Do you keep renting, take the money you would have spent on a mortgage and maintenance, and invest the difference into index funds?
Right.
Or do you buy now, get a foot in the door, even if it genuinely stretches you financially every month?
Do I keep paying my landlord and just hope my Vanguard account outperforms the housing market? Or do I make myself completely house poor today so I'm not totally priced out tomorrow?
Yeah, and the thing is, there is no universal answer.
Yeah.
It genuinely depends on your city, your timeline, your circumstances. Historically, in high-price-to-rent markets, certain renters may have seen stronger long-term returns by investing the difference.
Really?
Yeah, though obviously outcomes vary widely based on timing and individual discipline. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results, but it's a real strategy.
See, I lean super pessimistic on this. I've been quote-unquote researching buying a house for 2 years. 2 years of scrolling, saving listings, making these little spreadsheets, and I have taken zero actual action.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We're stripping away the doom scrolling, but we're also throwing out that toxic positivity from the online gurus, the guys yelling about buying 10 properties with no money down.
Oh, I can't stand those videos. So I need an objective look at the current playing field. No hype. Because my perception is totally skewed. What does the landscape actually look like in 2026?
So the defining feature right now is the elevated mortgage rate context paired with constrained inventory. The cost of borrowing money is noticeably higher. And a lot of people look at a 6 or 7% rate and think the market is broken.
Well, yeah.
But historically, over a 50-year timeline, those rates are actually much closer to the average.
I have to push back on that, though. Telling someone it's historically average feels incredibly dismissive when home prices have detached so violently from local incomes.
That is a very fair point.
If a house was 100 grand in 1995, an 8% rate hurt, but you could manage it. Today, that same house is $450,000. So an average rate on an inflated principal just wipes out a modern paycheck.
You're absolutely correct. It's the multiplier effect.
Yeah.
And to understand why prices surged, we have to look at the pandemic. We saw rates drop to the 2 and 3% range. That was not a natural market phenomenon.
Right. That was historically unusual.
Extremely. It was massive quantitative easing.
Yeah.
The Fed stepped in to keep the system from collapsing, which made borrowing practically free. So purchasing power exploded and prices went up. But the critical mechanism for 2026 is the lock-in effect.
Okay, explain how the lock-in effect is punishing me right now. Because if rates are back up, shouldn't demand cool off and prices drop?
In a perfectly fluid market, sure.
Yeah.
But housing isn't fluid. People have to live somewhere. Millions of homeowners locked in those historically unusual 3% rates. If they move today, they have to give that up and take on a 7% rate.
Oh man, so if I have a low rate, giving that up to borrow at 7% would add like $1,000 to my monthly payment just in interest, even for the exact same house.
Exactly. So they stay put. Inventory absolutely plummets. It's a cartel-like squeeze on supply that keeps prices high.
Okay, so prices aren't magically dropping tomorrow. Let's do a hypothetical illustration so the math really clicks.
Let's picture a $350,000 home in Atlanta. Great mid-sized city. In some markets, that's a beautiful starter home. In others, like Austin or Denver, or maybe a condo. But say you buy that with a 5% down payment. That's $17,500. You're taking out a loan for $332,500.
Okay, I've drained my savings, skipped vacations, and scraped together the $17,500. What does that actually cost me every month?
At current rates, the principal and interest alone could easily be $2,200 or $2,300 a month. But you can't stop there.
The hidden stuff.
Right. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, which is rising everywhere. And because you put down less than 20%, you have mortgage insurance. When you add all those unrecoverable costs, your actual out-of-pocket every month could easily push $2,900 or over $3,000.
That's $3,000. If I'm making $65,000 a year, my take-home pay is probably around $4,200 a month.
Which leaves you dangerously house poor. $1,200 left for groceries, gas, student loans, and a life.
So, if the math is that oppressive, why do people still push for it? Honestly, the thing keeping me on the sidelines is the 20% down rule. On a $350,000 house, 20% is $70,000. That feels mathematically impossible to save while renting.
Oh, the 20% myth. It's essentially financial dogma from the post-war period. You absolutely do not need 20% down today. In many cases, the median down payment for first-time buyers is closer to 6 or 8%.
Okay, break that down. How does that work?
Well, there are FHA loans
Mm-hmm.
backed by the Federal Housing Administration. With an FHA loan, you can often put down as little as 3.5%. On our hypothetical house, that's $12,250.
Okay, 12 grand is a lot, but it's not a mystical 70 grand. It's an amount I can actually visualize saving.
Exactly. And there are conventional loans for first-time buyers that allow as little as 3 or 5% down, depending on circumstances like income limits.
But there's a catch. When I toggle the down payment to 5% on Zillow, this new line item pops up. PMI, private mortgage insurance.
Ah, PMI.
And it feels like a penalty for not being rich, like
Yeah.
a fee because I don't have enough money.
I completely get that. And actually, I have to make a confession here, since you admitted your Zillow paralysis.
Oh, please do.
When I was first teaching myself all this finance stuff, like a few years ago, I genuinely thought PMI was a music festival.
Wait, really?
Yes. I thought it was like, hey, man, are you going to PMI in the desert this year? The lineup is sick.
That is amazing. A PMI music festival sounds like a bunch of stressed out actuaries in a dusty field.
Right. But then I learned what it actually was. And instead of thinking of it as a penalty fee, think of PMI as paying a corporate entity to act as your rich uncle who co-signs the loan.
I like this. Walk me through the rich uncle analogy.
So if you put 20% down, the bank is lending you 80%. They have a massive cushion if you default. But if you only put 5% down, their buffer is incredibly thin. They need a cosigner to bridge the gap.
But I don't have a rich uncle.
Exactly. So you hire a private mortgage insurance company to play that role. It's a risk management mechanism that allows working-class people to access capital without needing a trust fund.
That completely shifts my perspective. It's a structural requirement.
And this connects to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Right, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I always picture them as a lovely older couple who run a bed and breakfast but secretly control the global economy.
They kind of do. They are government-sponsored enterprises. They buy mortgages from local banks, so the local banks have fresh cash to lend to the next person. Then they bundle them and sell them to global investors.
Wow.
But those global investors demand safety. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have strict rules. If the down payment is less than 20%, the loan must carry private mortgage insurance.
It's the cost of doing business in the global system, but it still costs me out of pocket, like $200 a month. How do I rationally justify that?
You justify it with leverage. If a property appreciates significantly over time, those PMI costs may end up being far outweighed by long-term equity gains, though obviously appreciation is never guaranteed.
Yeah, if I stubbornly wait 5 years to save 20%, the house price jumps up anyway and my required down payment just moved further away.
Exactly. But there's another piece of mortgage math that exhausts people: amortization.
Yes, because this feels so unfair. I used to naively think if my mortgage was $2 grand a month and I paid it for a year, I'd owe 24 grand less on my loan.
Right, linear subtraction. But a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage ensures the lender gets their interest yield heavily upfront.
I have an analogy for this. Amortization is exactly like a luxury gym membership.
Oh, let's hear it.
Say you sign a 3-year contract. For the first 2 years, 80% of your monthly fee goes strictly toward the gym's overhead. The electricity, the eucalyptus steam room, the towels. Only 20% actually contributes to your personal fitness gains. You're sweating, you're paying, but your progress is agonizingly slow because the house takes its cut first.
That is brilliant. The overhead is the interest. The fitness gains are the principal paydown. On our hypothetical loan, in month 1, your payment is $2,100. Roughly $1,800 of that goes purely to interest.
That is sick.
Only $300 goes to principal. But you're missing 2 silent wealth builders: the inversion of the schedule and inflation. Fast forward to year 25, that same payment is now mostly going to principal.
Okay, the inversion makes sense, but inflation. I thought inflation was the enemy making my groceries expensive.
Inflation is the enemy of cash, but the greatest ally of fixed-rate debt. You are borrowing money in 2026 dollars. 10 or 15 years from now, your income will likely be higher due to inflation, but your mortgage payment stays exactly the same. You are paying back the bank with future dollars that are worth less.
Wow, you lock in your housing cost while the world gets more expensive. Okay, so rationally the spreadsheet makes sense, but I am still paralyzed on my couch. The math isn't the only barrier here.
Not at all. Human psychology is a massive wall. We have 3 psychological traps keeping you stuck. Trap number 1, the rate drop trap. The delusion of waiting indefinitely for 3% rates to return.
Oh, this is the anchoring bias, right? We've anchored our idea of normal to a weird anomaly. It's like refusing to buy a latte for $4 because 3 years ago a cafe had a 10-cent grand opening promo.
Yes, and the tragedy is the opportunity cost. While you wait, you're paying your landlord's mortgage.
Trap number 2, the paralysis trap. This is me. Endless, obsessive research without taking a single real-world step.
Tell me what that looks like for you.
I have 4 real estate apps open. I have Excel models for hypothetical property taxes. I know the school boundaries in 3 counties, and I don't even have kids, but I haven't spoken to a lender once.
Or pulled your credit report.
Nope.
It's risk aversion masquerading as diligence. Researching gives you a dopamine hit of productivity without any actual risk of rejection. If you go to a lender, they might tell you that you can only afford a condo, not the single-family house you want.
It is totally an ego protection mechanism.
Right.
And you know what feeds it? Trap number 3, the comparison trap.
Instagram.
Yes. Opening the app and seeing that friend who used to borrow $20 for drinks suddenly holding keys in front of a renovated brick house. I instantly feel like a financial failure.
You are comparing your behind-the-scenes financial reality to someone else's curated highlight reel. We have to deconstruct the hidden realities there. Number 1, the unseen down payment gift.
Oh, right. Family money.
A huge percentage of first-time buyers get massive help from their parents. They don't put that in the hashtag. You have no idea if they actually save that money themselves. Reality number 2, dual incomes. You might be comparing your single income to a household with 2 earners.
That completely changes the purchasing power.
And reality number 3, the shadow debt. You have no idea how much mortgage stress they're secretly under. They might be spending 60% of their take-home pay on housing, financing furniture on credit cards. You see the smiling photo, not the 2 a.m. panic attacks.
The shadow debt. That is terrifying, but weirdly liberating. Okay, so we need a practical cure for this paralysis.
Yes, 5 concrete jargon-free steps you can take today. Step 1, check your credit score and understand its impact.
Risk-based pricing, right? Like, how much does a mediocre score actually cost me?
Say you're getting a $300,000 loan. Buyer A has a 740 score. Buyer B has a 620. The lender will charge Buyer B a higher rate to compensate for the risk. That spread could mean a difference of $150 to $250 a month.
Wait, $250 a month, times 12 months, times 30 years. That is $90,000. A mediocre credit score costs you 90 grand in unnecessary interest.
In many cases, yes. That's wealth transferred from you to the bank. So fix your credit. Step 2, calculate a real budget. Not just the optimistic online calculator. You need to include closing costs.
The hidden cover charge. How much are we talking?
Often 2 to 5% of the purchase price. On our Atlanta house, 3% is 10.5 grand. And you usually have to pay that in cash at the closing table, completely separate from your down payment.
That is brutal. What else?
Capital expenditures and maintenance. When you rent, if the HVAC breaks, you call the landlord. When you own, you write a check for 6 grand. You should estimate 1 to 3% of the home's value annually for maintenance.
So I need a sinking fund just to keep the house from falling apart. Okay, step 3.
Step 3, get pre-approved by a lender before you ever fall in love with a listing.
This is the Whole Foods rule.
Yes, tell the analogy.
Going to an open house without a pre-approval is exactly like going to Whole Foods starving with no budget and no list. Your rational brain shuts down. You buy $25 truffle Gouda because you had a hard week. You make emotional decisions, and at the register, you panic.
If you look at a house without knowing your budget, you fall in love emotionally. And when the lender says you can't afford it, people start making terrible decisions to force the math, like draining your 401ks. The pre-approval is your grocery list. It protects you from yourself.
Step 4.
Step 4, understand the price-to-rent ratio in your city. Take the median home price and divide it by the median annual rent.
Okay, so if a house is $400,000 and rent is $24,000 a year, that's 16.6.
Right. As a rule of thumb, ratios above 20 often indicate markets where renting may be more financially attractive. It compares the unrecoverable costs of buying taxes, insurance, interest, to the unrecoverable cost of renting.
Above 20, renting makes more sense. That removes so much emotion.
Okay, final
It's true.
step. Step 5.
Step 5.
Consider house hacking.
Sounds like a tech bro buzzword.
It's just a strategy to mitigate high rates by generating rental income from your primary residence. Buying a duplex or a house with an ADU like an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard.
I don't know if I want to be a landlord, though. The 2 a.m. clogged toilet calls.
Totally valid. But if you can't afford a single-family home, a duplex changes the math. Lenders let you count projected rental income toward your qualifying income. The tenant subsidizes your mortgage.
You're aggressively building equity, but your monthly cash flow feels like you're just renting. Okay, those 5 steps are gold. But I want to leave everyone with a final provocative thought. We've talked all about buying, but what if the real secret to extreme wealth in your 20s and 30s isn't real estate equity at all?
Oh, geographic arbitrage.
Exactly. What if your greatest asset is your mobility? If you rent and a recruiter offers you a dream job across the country with a massive salary bump, you break your lease and go. You capture that career growth.
But if you own that house in Atlanta, you're anchored. You have to prep it, pay agent commissions, sell in a high-rate environment. It's massive friction.
Renting could actually be your biggest professional advantage. It preserves your flexibility.
That is a brilliant reframe, and why there's no single right answer. You just have to take one step. Like going to the gym. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to walk in and lift something.
Pull your credit report. Build the budget. Break the freeze.
All right, as a reminder, everything today was educational only. Always consult a professional.
Definitely. Do your research.
So, we want to know in the comments, are you team buy or team rent right now? Tell us down below, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, because next time we're diving into hidden corporate debt. Remember, you're not financially behind. The rules just changed. See you next time.